So we're going to go through some basic, very basic methods of valuation, talk about those, and then we'll be able to, to pick back up about, the details of LBO structures, why you have them, and what the likely result is. And then after we take our lunch break, we'll be able to kind of kick off into looking at a few models and things like that. So these you don't have, so you'll have them, by the end.
Okay.
But we're actually going to cover these as opposed to the first few slides that you have. So in terms of methods of evaluation, what we talked about, here in the very beginning, was that all of the details about a potential acquisition target, are irrelevant if you pay too much, right? So it could be a great company. If Microsoft today is trading at $20 billion, then Microsoft can be a great company. But if I buy it for 40, and it's only trading today for 20, then I've overpaid and I'm not going to get any value out of it. So it doesn't matter that it's a good company. That's irrelevant if you pay too much. Similarly, if you're selling a company, and you could be selling a company for a lot of reasons. You could be selling a company because you're an entrepreneur. You could be selling a company because you work for, Eaton Corporation or Google or something like that, and you're in a business development group and you need to take off an unprofitable division or a division that, is involved in a line of business that your company no longer wants to be in, those types of things. You may sell it because you're an investment banker. But for any of those reasons, again, if your company is a great company, or your company you're working with, or your client or whoever is a good company, but you get a crappy valuation, then it doesn't matter that it's a strong company unless you can make the argument. So valuation is sort of a key part of the process of project. And so there's a lot of different ways to value companies. One is just to look, the simplest way is just to look at the value of the assets of a company. So that's no different than you would look at the assets of an individual, right? So, let's say I have a house that's worth $250,000. Let's say I got a used BMW that's probably worth 10, $2,000 in clothes. Whatever. Somebody that values everything I have, and they come up with a number. So you can do the same thing for companies. So you would value a company's accounts receivables. What people owe them. That's an asset. What property, plant, and equipment they have. Do they own a building? How many computers do they have? If you're doing maintenance, repair, and overhaul, the machinery they used to do that is worth something. They can sell to someone else. What intellectual property do they have? So it may not be a physical asset, but it may be something like the patent on on a drug that's going to possibly make people with cancer live longer, say, right? So that's not a physical asset, but it's an important formulation that's worth a lot of money potentially. So all those things are assets. So you could theoretically just add up the assets of a company and and say this is the value. Now it gets tricky with things that don't have a very common value. So if you were appraising, if you're going to appraise my apartment in Brooklyn, then you can say, okay, well, this is the brownstone. It was built in 1864. There's one floor of it. There's things across the street selling at XYZ price. And so here's the valuation. So any of us could do that, right? If you were appraising
the White House,
the White House, or if you're appraising, let's say, the formulation for a heparin antagonist, there's probably only one person who would do it. You see what I'm saying? So it gets a little vague with certain types of assets. If you were going to value Google based on its assets, then it wouldn't be a fraction of what it actually trades at. So book value is straightforward, but it's limited. Another method for comparing companies or for valuing companies is comparable transactions, right? So in that situation, what you do is you say, okay, ABC widget company, or even to use a specific example, Chrysler, right? So if we know that Chrysler just sold for 1.5 times its revenue, so let's say Toyota buys Chrysler for 1.5 times its revenue. So its revenue is $28 billion. So you end up selling the company for 30-something billion dollars. Then if Ford decides that it's going to sell itself, right, then we can get a feel for what somebody should pay based on comparing other transactions in the industry. So we can lay out the last 15 major car company deals and get a feel for what the other guys paid, and then extrapolate that onto whatever we're selling. And that's how we make the argument. Because again, all of this stuff is about making a case, right? And that's even if you're working inside a firm, right? Because the thing is that, if somebody who's 50 years old throws you a company and some financial statements and says, come up with a value for this, then when you come back, you can't have just pulled a number, out of the air. What you're saying has to actually make sense in some objective way that everyone can understand, right? So the whole idea is that having comparable transactions, is making a very logical case. This is what the last 5 deals look like. So this is likely what our deal will look like, So the other method is looking at comparable multiples, because there may not always be a lot of M&A in the particular industry that you're looking at. So you may not have a lot of transactions that are available to even evaluate, right? You may be looking at something where transactions are very sparse, or where there's not really stuff that's directly comparable. So you may have to do comparable multiples. So in this case, what you do is you take specific, and I'm just trying to give you an overview here, but you take specific ratios, financial ratios within a company, and you compare them side by side and just extrapolate from there. So for instance, if IBM, in some sense today, is transitioning itself to sort of an IT consulting company, right? So if somebody bought IBM for 3 times sales, 3 times their top line sales, then I might be able to make the argument that, okay, even though the company that I'm selling right now is only $25 million in revenue, and not in the billions, I can say, well, look, IBM went off at 3 times sales, so my company should go off at 3 times sales. Or this is what my company is worth today. So even if I'm not trying to sell it, let's just say if if I'm buying it, just buying the stock, right? If IBM is trading at 3 times sales, so that means somebody's buying little pieces of the company every day for 3 times sales, right? Little M&A transactions, hedge funds, individual investors and whatnot. They're indicating that the value of IBM is 3 times sales. So therefore, I can make the argument that that my little company should be trading at that same multiple. The same thing with earnings. We were talking during the break about PE ratios, just price to earnings ratios. So in that case, you just take, the market price, per share and divide it by the earnings per share, or sort of what people consider the